Hello, algebra classes. We're going to take a look right now at our 10.1a samples. We're going to wrap up our first lesson in our data analysis chapter, where we're studying how we can select samples out of a population that will represent what is happening in the entire population, and then what sort of bias can creep into our survey samples or to our survey questions, and how to avoid that bias so we get good data to work with when we're trying to understand what is happening in a particular population on a particular issue. So we'll start with sample 1. It says to explain why this is a biased survey sample. We have the information here. Students in Minnesota were asked how many snow days should be scheduled into the school year for all U.S. schools. So we're imagining that surveys being done nationwide for determining the number of snow days that should be built into all U.S. schools for each year. And so these students in Minnesota were asked about how many snow days they believe should be scheduled into U.S. schools. Why is this a biased survey sample? Well, the answers provided by the students in Minnesota might be very different than the answers provided by students in other states, such as Florida, California, or Texas, where snow is much less frequent. So the Minnesota folk, those students might determine that lots of snow days are needed across the U.S. People in Texas, California, Florida might say no snow days are needed, but we are finding out that information from those states, those people in the states where there isn't much snow. So this might be a very biased sample, might not give us a representative piece of the information that we're looking for the entire nation. Sample 2 is going to ask you to rewrite a survey question so that it is not biased. The question that you'll see here is biased. The question is, should taxes be raised in Pomona to support the construction of new unnecessary roads? Well, the way this question is written, it suggests that the answer should be no. If the roads are unnecessary, why would you want to build them? So we're going to rewrite this question so we can actually find out what the true opinions are of those Pomona residents. We're going to ask a few people in Pomona. We'll pull out a representative sample, ask the question in an unbiased way, and that will tell us whether or not it would be a good idea to proceed with the construction of new roads. So the question that you might ask of the sample group would be, should taxes be raised for the construction of new roads in Pomona? That way no particular answer is suggested or encouraged, and so we would get a good representative view of the opinions that people actually hold in Pomona. As long as we have a representative sample of the population of people in Pomona, we should have a good idea how people in general feel on this issue. Samples 3 through 7, we're going to name the sampling method used. And we're actually going to find that each one of these sample problems from 3 to 7 will have us practice with naming a different sampling method. There's 5 methods, and we're going to run into all 5 of them in samples 3 through 7. So sample 3 says, a researcher who was studying favorite ice cream flavors asked store patrons who were sitting within 12 feet of the researcher what their favorite ice cream was. Well, this is a convenience sample. The researcher was only asking people that it was convenient to ask if they were sitting pretty close to him, within 12 feet. That may or may not be representative of all of the ice cream eaters that he is trying to find out about, but this is how he's conducting his sample. So this is a convenience sample. Only if they sit close to him will they be asked. Sample 4. Sample 4, a computer generated a random list of Pomona residents and asked, does our city need more barbershops? Well, that would be a random sample because people were selected at random. Everyone in Pomona had an equal chance of being asked, and the computer simply picked randomly. So that's a random sample, which is always a good choice to use when you want to find out what's happening in an entire population. Sample 5. A teacher asked students who raised their hands how many hours they studied for the test. This would be a self-selected sample because people who volunteered to answer the question did so. Those students who did not want to answer the question didn't raise their hands, and so they were not part of the sample. A self-selected sample may or may not actually represent the entire population that is being studied. Sample 6. Students who sat in the first and last row of every class in the school were asked, what is your favorite subject? This is a systematic sample. There was a rule that was followed. If the student was seated first or in the first or last row, they got asked. Anyone in the middle of the class didn't get asked, so there was a rule that was being followed. And systematic samples can often produce pretty representative samples of the entire population. Sample 7. 10 random people from every city in LA County were asked, do you own a dog? So perhaps there was a study that was underway to find out the percentage of families, the percentage of people or families in LA County that owned a dog. This is an example of a stratified random sampling method. First, we group all of LA County into cities, and then within each of those cities, 10 random people are selected to answer the question. So a stratified random sample will always first group the population into chunks, and then once each one of those groups is established, then random people or random members will be selected in order to respond to the survey question. Stratified random samples are oftentimes good representations of the entire population. All right, so that finishes our samples for today, where we practice with writing unbiased survey questions and identifying if there was a bias in a survey sample and how to get around that. And then we also looked at the 5 different sampling methods that can be used to represent an entire population when we are trying to figure out a pattern or to generally represent the data of a whole population. All right, we'll see you next time where we're going to write our own surveys.